Okay, good afternoon or good morning. We're still in the morning, I think, officially. My name is Lucy Gaffney. I'll be chairing this session on Business for Biodiversity, and I'm also the platform development lead for the new platform that was officially launched yesterday, which is really great news for us. And now the real work begins in terms of developing this platform so that it is fit for purpose. I'm going to start off by giving a brief overview of the platform as it is, and then we're going to have a number of speakers, quite a lot of us today actually. The first part of the session will be about that journey to nature positive. We'll have Cillian McMahon from Business in the Community talking about how they are supporting their members with their biodiversity agendas. We'll have Conor Kretsch as well speaking about moving towards nature positive business models. And in the second section, we'll have nature positive stories from business. And then in the third section, we're going to revisit the Seeds for Nature companies and how they have done against the commitments they made back in 2019. So I'll motor on. If I can. Okay, sorry, I've skipped there too. So yes, Business for Biodiversity. Delighted to have launched it yesterday with the ministers. Business transitioning to nature positive, that's our tagline, and I think it's really important that we become familiar with that term nature positive. It's really about, it's the net zero really of the biodiversity conversation, and it's a word that we have to become very comfortable with in terms of the language that's used in relation to business. And the transition element is really important as well because, you know, this is this will be an initiative process for business. It is a learning process. We're all learning how to do this together. So you'll see in the platform pathway that it is kind of a cyclical assessment, transformation, commitment kind of a cycle that we'll be going through. In terms of our partnerships, the project itself is being led by Natural Capital Ireland and with great support from Business in the Community and the National Biodiversity Data Centre, because this will be a data-driven platform. We're very lucky to have 3 years of seed funding from the Department of Agriculture and NPWS. So we have 3 years to get this working to become a good fit for purpose platform. In terms of the contributors, we have Professor Jane Stout and Dr. Una Fitzpatrick, who you're all probably familiar with as the architects of the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. We've got great input from NPWS as well, so they are helping to steer the platform in the right direction. And we've also got an advisory group comprising people from different sectors that will help, again, to guide us in different areas of the platform between finance and strategy and that kind of thing. Implementation, then there's myself and a great team of people from Natural Capital Ireland are helping to get this off the ground. So our aims really, this platform was born out of the third edition of the National Biodiversity Action Plan. This was one of the objectives. And really what the platform is trying to do here is to encourage and incentivise the Irish private sector to mobilise for nature. So you'll see that this is not a platform that's solely about the actions that you're taking on site, whether it's doing your wildflower patches, which I'll get on to in a little while because we're moving away from wildflowers, or the beehives on the roof. They're not the type, that's not really what this platform is about. This is about reimagining your business and evolving and changing your business to become more nature positive. And it's really centred around understanding what's material to your organisation and understanding what your impact is, either directly to nature or through your value chain. So it's very strategic, it's about business models, and that's the direction that this conversation is moving. This platform also aims to support the next edition of the NBAP, of course, which this conference is centred on. This button likes a good press. There we go. So this is what the pathway looks like. I actually changed this morning because this is such an area that's constantly changing, and there's always new language that we need to keep up to date on and make sure that we're completely aligned with what's happening on a global level, on an EU level. So businesses will join, that there's a learning aspect here. We want all of the businesses that commit to this to really understand what they're committing to. So the learning element, we're engaging with third level institutions at this point to develop meaningful learning modules to help organisations actually realise their potential in terms of the nature positive journey, but also to help them to achieve the elements of the pledge which we'll set out over the coming months. And the newly released sort of high-level actions for business uses these 3 words: assess, commit, which is about the planning side, and transforming, which is about systems transformation, but ultimately implementing your actions. And this is all surrounded by disclosure, and disclosure is the antidote to greenwashing, and I think that's very important for businesses to understand. There's no room for that here in this platform. Oh, sorry, no. So just going back to the learning. So at the moment, the platform was launched. It is just really a website at the minute. It's got all of the international guidance and methodologies and all of the interesting white papers that are good if you have time to read them. A lot of them are meaty and overwhelming, but the platform will help to try and distill some of that information into guidance documents for the Irish context, but also specific to sectors. So the type of things that we will try and address is, how can I lower my impact on nature through my business? So that's a question that a lot of people don't have the answers to, and so the platform will endeavour to help businesses get to those answers, because I think without understanding how you impact or depend on nature, you can't build a meaningful strategy. So just to expand on that assess, commit, transform cycle, these coloured boxes represent elements of the pledge as it is at the moment. We're still working on it, and we will. We're seeking lots of stakeholder engagement on it to make sure that it's clear and it's ambitious enough, and that businesses will respond well to it. The language is good. So you can see there that there's different elements there that will feed into the cycle. A big emphasis on partnerships and collaboration. But also, it's underpinned by this whole process of understanding your impacts and dependencies. Another element that we're exploring is this concept of a business biodiversity score. So we're looking at devising a kind of metric around this in a holistic way. So not just, as I said, not just the actions, but also how your business is structured, how you've changed things to become more nature positive, how you've engaged your value chain upstream and downstream. We want businesses to move towards a circular model where if they're producing products, moving away from the take, make, waste linearity. We want businesses to encourage and engage their staff, to bring these ideas home with them, to open that door between their work and their personal life, and make sure that those environmental ideas flow between work and personal life. And also that working together with communities, with each other, within your sector, coming together to build up best practice, and also utilising and valuing our ENGOs. So sometimes you might feel like, you might have a budget to do something like this, and that budget might be better spent engaging with an NGO to support or finance or resource a project that they're doing, rather than you trying to do your own wildflower meadow or whatever. So the difficulty, since I mentioned it, with wildflower meadows now is they're pervasive. Everybody thinks that that's what they need to be doing, but there's a lot of unregulated seed mixes coming into the country now, and the problem with that is they are introducing invasive species. They're introducing species that our pollinators can't really harvest effectively. So the best thing you can do is don't sow, let it grow, let it naturally regenerate. And then put a big sign on it saying, we're managing this for wildlife, in case anyone accuses you of being lazy. Okay, so interlinked initiatives is just a little back and forth bubble, because we're very conscious of the fact that we don't want to be doubling up on what's already out there. So we really want to create synergies with these other platforms and initiatives that are existing, and hopefully feed into and out of those. So how do you improve your business biodiversity score? Engaging your value chain, having those discussions with your suppliers, looking at where you're investing your pensions, looking at your value chain as a whole, and engaging people. So part of the remit of the platform when you join is that you bring 2 suppliers with you. Reducing your impacts on biodiversity, and I think critically you have to understand what they are first, and that involves doing a bit of a deep dive in and out of your value chain to see exactly where that harm is happening. You'll be very surprised, I suppose, with what you uncover. creating more spaces for nature. Just again, if you have a land holding and you're able to do positive things for nature there, great. If not, engage with your NGOs and see if you can support a rewilding project. Engaging with your local community, again, collaboration is super important, and then improving your performance in other platforms or initiatives. So that is me. I'm conscious that we've got 1 million speakers today, so I'm going to motor on. If anyone wants to reach out to me at any point, that's my contact information. And I will move on to the next speaker, who's literally just walked in the door. It's Conor Kretsch. I'll forgive him because he's organised this whole conference and it's been great. So I'll hand it over to you, Conor, and we'll be timekeeping.
So I'm not even sure what time of the day it is. It's so good morning or good afternoon. It's one of those. Sorry, literally, I'm out of breath because I've been trying to get a few things fixed for other people elsewhere. So thank you very much, Lucy. And I'm sorry it was rude of me to come in towards the end of your presentation, but I've listened to the pitch for the platform for a while, and I think it's something that's very timely, and it's fantastic to actually see something like that actually happening here in Ireland, because it's been happening around Europe and around the world for well over, 15 years and even longer in some cases. So it's nice to see this kind of a platform to make the connections between businesses and biodiversity, working with scientists, local communities, and government agencies. So, excuse me, I'm still a little bit out of breath. I'm not as fit as I used to be. So, kind of looking at some of the history of this and where a lot of this has kind of come from at the moment, and why this is seen as being such an intense issue and something that businesses really need to get on board with. I know from my conversations with Lucy has been doing a lot of outreach on behalf of the platform to different businesses around the country to explain to them what the platform is about, to explain to them why this is an issue and why they should get on board. And because the issue of broadly sustainability, specifically climate change, and now increasingly biodiversity, is on the radar for businesses, because it's on the radar for their families, it's on the TV, it's something that they're aware of every day, the response has by and large actually been quite good. But there have occasionally been some businesses that have had the attitude of, well, it sounds like something that we'd have to actually hire a person for, and that just sounds like it's something that's outside of the mainstream for us. It's a little bit fringe, and no thank you. That's the same response that people really had to the health and safety issues back in the 1970s, 1980s. So it's while many businesses, as I've said, are already on board, there are some that really are still in that old mindset and that mentality, and that's a shame. The World Economic Forum back in 2010 tried to overcome some of these kind of, some of that kind of reluctance and that kind of uncertainty about why businesses should care about biodiversity by putting a lot of effort into looking at the relationship between biodiversity and other risks that businesses and governments were dealing with around the world. So this was an interesting slide. As you can imagine, the World Economic Forum, for whatever you might think of that forum as a vehicle for change or a vehicle for a discussion, it does get a lot of attention in the business and community and at the economic sector, kind of at the government level. So for them to put biodiversity at the very center of a whole range of global risks really helped to kind of coalesce business thinking around some of this. So biodiversity being linked to everything from food crises to climate change to international terrorism to the migration crisis that was happening around that time and that we're seeing evolve as a crisis as a result of what's been happening in the world recently, including the impacts of climate change and ecosystem change. So it's something that was very important to actually have an organization like the WEF actually make these kind of connections and be very explicit that unless we address the biodiversity crisis, you can forget about addressing the rest. So that was from 2010. This is the most recent Global Risks Horizon imaging from the World Economic Forum's most recent Global Risks Report, and where I've just thrown on a little daisy image there are the ones, the particular issues that are specifically linked directly or indirectly to ecosystem change, biodiversity loss. In some cases it's indirect because it might be precipitated by climate change, but it's the impacts of climate change on ecosystems which make those an issue for governments and for businesses. So again, looking at how the perception of global risks has changed over time, looking at previous reports where I've outlined, there isn't a pointer here, but you can see And the top row, it's what, the top 5 in the global risk survey that the WF carries out. The top 5 kind of global risks, what businesses and governments are kind of identifying as being the key issues. All of the ones that are in green, and you can see that kind of diagonal line is showing, over time, going back from, it's here in front of me, about 2012 or so, up until, over the last 9 or 10 years. You can see that increasingly it's environmental issues and issues linked with biodiversity that are coming to the forefront of people's minds. Even the infectious disease one, which is linked as red because it's a public health issue, it is, as we know, after the pandemic, and we've known, in the public health community, they've known for well over 40 years that the risk of emerging infections such as coronaviruses is directly related to human impacts on ecosystems. Okay, so that's nice from a kind of an overall kind of a global picture and looking at, these kind of existential crises that we need to kind of look at. But why should businesses specifically in Ireland really consider this? Well, one of the key messages that we've had from so many different reports, and while it's great to have new reports coming out really bringing these issues to the fore, it is a shame to see the same kind of issues having to be repeated again and again and again. And these kind of issues have been highlighted by governments, by international organisations such as the IUCN or the World Wildlife Fund, by think tanks in Ireland and at home. And it is unfortunate that we still have to keep banging this drum. But the problem is that from a business perspective, and thinking of business at the macro level in Ireland, not necessarily just individual companies, there has been an ongoing failure to account for those kind of public assets and public goods that are delivered by biodiversity and delivered by ecosystems that just don't make it onto a corporate balance sheet. And there's this old habit of, economies, financial markets really trading and focusing on kind of privately owned commodities and things which should be outside of the public goods sphere. The other side of it is that business interests at all levels, from individual companies right the way up to global corporations, and even, literally thinking of the kind of very small tech entrepreneurs that we see popping up everywhere, where it's just some guy in his dressing gown in his mother's house making millions over the internet. You'd be surprised at the relationships that biodiversity have to the entire economic ecosystem that he's a part of. Businesses are, at all levels, major drivers of ecosystem change in many regions, not necessarily at home, but perhaps overseas. So this argument of, well, we don't really have time, it's a fringe issue, the environment is kind of separate from our bottom line, that's very far out of date. And we've been saying that for well over 30 years at this stage. Likewise, a healthy economy, as the Taoiseach said in his presentation this morning, is fully dependent on a healthy environment and on healthy ecosystems. And that makes biodiversity conservation a critical responsibility of every business sector. So from the perspective of, say, the Business and Biodiversity Platform, when we talk to businesses that say, well, it doesn't really sound like something we can invest money in, well, then they have a choice. They can either, take the lead, be outstanding in their field at the moment, play catch up because there's an awful lot of other people that are already doing it and there's actually, lessons to be learned there, or you just become irrelevant in this argument and that becomes more costly. So one of the questions that we've had from businesses occasionally is, well, where do I start? How do I deal with all of this complexity? Biodiversity isn't quite as simple as climate change for many businesses, where dealing with climate issues is about dealing with carbon, it's about greenhouse gas emissions, it's something which can be very easily measured and something which can be very easily addressed, relatively easily compared to biodiversity. So you have all of these different issues from an ecological perspective where, you have different geographic scales that you need to look at, you have different, kind of local cultural associations with biodiversity, you might have, are there real ecosystem services in an area, or are they just potential ecosystem services? So you can point to a forest and say that's a great place for people to walk, but if nobody walks there, it doesn't actually provide that service. So this all has to be accounted for. So if a business is saying, well, we're going to protect a local woodland for the benefit of the local community, they have to really consider who is actually benefiting from that. Is it just a great PR exercise? Does it actually benefit biodiversity in the local community? So it can be really frustrating and really difficult. It's like being back in school to try and have to get your head around a lot of these different things. And then if you look at it then from another angle, which would be from an economics angle, and this is something that accountancy firms, business management consultancies, and major banks and financial companies are really getting on board with. Looking at it in economic language, when we look at how Ireland's biodiversity and biodiversity on a larger scale is being utilised by businesses that do not account for their impacts on nature or their dependencies on nature, you get these kind of comments, which I've kind of pulled out from some accounting reports that I looked at, but they're all exactly relevant to the biodiversity situation. Borrowing from a depleted resource, heavily indebted to unstable overseas interests, exposed to massive financial and operational liabilities, very dependent on goods and services that they actually don't really understand because they don't really look into the biodiversity component. These are kind of borrowings that they have absolutely no prospect of paying back if you've been responsible for causing destruction of ecosystems. That's not something which there's ever, that's not something that there is often a way back from. And there were then this argument again of, well, even if I knew how, we don't have the resources, we don't have the people, we don't have the interest, we don't have whatever. And that's the kind of thing that for most accountants would cause heart attack and gastric ulcers and all kind of stuff. So this is the mindset that we need to get businesses to kind of click into. This is a paper from 2008. I'm just putting it up because it is something that has helped to change the mindset in a lot of the big kind of financial management companies, corporate advisors and so on. This idea of all of these different issues being linked. So this has, I mentioned it before from the World Economic Forum perspective, how not only are all of these issues linked, but one of the reasons why we are still dealing with things like the biodiversity crisis, and we're now 30 years after the Biodiversity Convention was signed initially when it came into being, and it's been ratified by various countries, including Ireland, in the intervening years. But the biodiversity crisis hasn't changed. The reasons for the biodiversity convention have not changed, and if anything, they've gotten worse. While there have been obviously certain successes in certain areas, for many there really haven't been. And part of the problem is this failure of governments, of businesses, of civil society organizations, of community groups to really be able to work together. And that's not everybody's fault. Everybody wants to do this, but for various reasons, things don't happen. And you'll hear somebody say, well, do we really have time for another crisis? We're just out of a pandemic. We have something going on in the Ukraine. I've been told for years that I have to get on board with climate change. Now there's the Sustainable Development Goals. And the point here is that we actually need to create the institutions that actually react to the fact that all of these things are linked. And you might say, well, how is the crisis in Ukraine linked to biodiversity? Well, it's not necessarily about the biodiversity crisis itself, but it's about how governments partner in order to be able to deal with things. So the issue in Ukraine can be looked at one way, for example, as being a fundamental failure of communications, a fundamental failure of partnerships, a failure of looking at the common interest. And yes, I can't remember the phrase, it slipped my mind, but kind of a global kind of communal self-interest rather than looking at the bottom line. And that it means if there's that kind of breakdown in communication and even how different global institutions are dealing with these crises, there's arguments over who should be involved, how much they should do this, what does this reaction or action really mean, and does that affect a country's bottom line? It shows a failure of thinking, and this is where I think businesses can really step in. When businesses can show that they actually have a wider perspective, and I'm being told to shut up, which is very important, as Lucy knows, because I'll just keep going. So this is the space that businesses can really step into, is to recognize that acting in any one area doesn't just require that you are aware of the fact that it links to other areas, but that you need to be linking with other institutions, with other actors, in order to create the space within this can actually happen. So that means businesses working with communities. It means reaching out and engaging with governments, including through things like the Business and Biodiversity Platform, which is an initiative of the Irish government, and linking with non-profit organisations, environmental NGOs and other NGOs, and really looking for, well, what do I do? What do I do as a business? What decisions do I make as a business manager or CFO, CEO, COO, whatever it happens to be, that actually link in with this wider system, and how don't focus necessarily on, oh, here's biodiversity, another thing I have to look at. It's like, well, actually, what am I doing in this space that biodiversity is relevant to? What kind of partnerships and dialogues can I create? And I just want to point out that we have our colleague Cillian from Business in the Community Ireland. BITC has been doing this for a long time in the global sustainability space. Bringing it, into the Irish context is I think, fantastic as well. So that's my pitch for why businesses should get involved. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. It can be a challenge to get Conor to stop talking sometimes. I didn't introduce Conor properly, actually, in my haste. Conor is the chair of the steering committee of Natural Capital Ireland, so thank you so much, Conor, for that. Cillian is the CSR advisor with Business in the Community, and he's up next. Thanks, Cillian.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much. So basically, my name is Cillian McMahon. We got it changing now to sustainability advisor, as the terminology is already changing. But like as we said, it's all linked. So just for those of you who don't know who we are, Business in Community Ireland, we were founded in the year 2001. We are a non-for-profit. We are the leading advisors on sustainability in Ireland. Our purpose and vision is to inspire and enable businesses to bring about a sustainable low-carbon economy where everybody thrives and also inclusive. We are a membership network. We work with over 115 of Ireland's leading companies from all different sectors, all different sizes. Some of the people are here in the room today. In terms of how we work with our members, we look at both the social and environmental areas of sustainability. And we really focus on embedding sustainability within the organizations. I always go back to a quote by Rodney Irwin from the World Business Council Sustainable Development. He says, "Sustainability is not a committee, a role, or a report. It is the outcome of your business strategy." And I think that's been echoed by Lucy and Conor earlier on. So, in terms of biodiversity, so we started working on biodiversity in 2014. It was a topic which we felt that our companies didn't really understand. They didn't understand why it's applicable to them. What are their impacts and dependencies? But as has been outlined already, an estimated $44 trillion of economic value generation is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services. So as I said before, every company impacts and depends on nature, so they need to do something. So in order to kind of create awareness and generate action in this area, we developed a number of tools. One of the first initiatives was the Business and Biodiversity Framework for Business, which we initiated with the Data Centre and Trinity College. It's a very good tool for companies when they want to get started. It helps you to integrate biodiversity into your environmental management system, for example, into your procurement, into your governance, your workplace and well-being, and also community and voluntary initiatives. So it's a very good tool to get started. Also around this time, we started working with an ecologist who would come in, particularly with companies with large sites, and give them some guidance on what to do, develop a biodiversity action plan, some simple actions that they could take on, or even just to bounce ideas off them. And we're still working, Maeve Burke, who's here in attendance with her today. So it's a really good service, and companies get great value. And also around this time, as the companies got more mature, there were some great stories emerging. So we decided to organize a biodiversity learning network. So about 2 or 3 times a year, we get companies to come together and share their stories and what they were doing around biodiversity, rather than having to reinvent the wheel. And this has been really impactful, and hopefully the platform will continue this. And in 2019, at the last Biodiversity Conference, we launched the Business and Biodiversity Handbook for Business, and it's on our website, one of the most downloaded documents on our website, definitely worth a read if you haven't read it already. But there's some really good tips on how to get started. There are some case studies from other businesses, a directory of environmental NGOs, a very practical guide, and I definitely recommend reading it. However, and also, I think there was talking there about ENGOs. We've seen a lot of great partnerships between businesses and from NGOs. So obviously, you would have the Clean Coasts and the Beach Cleans, which is fantastic. But over the last number of years, we've seen companies become more strategic. So we're seeing them, let's say, for example, where a business would provide professional skills on IT and management pro bono to an environmental NGO. And then, as quid pro quo, the environmental NGO could give a lunch and learn and a talk to these businesses. So, we're seeing some really good strategic partnerships. I know Deloitte and Leave No Trace, for example, is an example. So definitely something we'd encourage, and in our work in Business in Ireland, we can facilitate this. What I thought I'd do now is, and one thing that one anecdote I had, I remember chatting to a CEO of a life sciences company, and this company had undertaken a biodiversity project, and he said the employee was more productive now that he got involved. So just another benefit to add in. Obviously, our companies have really embraced biodiversity, and I've just pulled together a number of examples. One of the first companies to really take action on biodiversity has Intel. They have integrated biodiversity into their environmental management system. So when they get audited for ISO 14001, they get checked on what they're doing for biodiversity. They've also done a lot of wildflower protections, a lot of protection around the River Rye beside their site. They've also looked outside their site. They have a North Kildare biodiversity map, and last year you would have heard about they drained 60 hectares of bog wetland in the Liffey Basin in Wicklow. Which has also achieved their goal of water restoration, but also biodiversity impact. Cook Medical down in Limerick have also a company with a large site. They did a full assessment of their site on the species and developed a biodiversity action plan. As companies are becoming more mature, they're starting really to look at their supply chain. So Heineken and Irish Distillers are a good example. Heineken is part of the Protecting Farmland Pollinator Scheme. So they work with farmers in their supply chain, and they pay them based on taking pollinator-friendly actions. Similarly, the Sustainable Green Barley Scheme by Irish Distillers, growers of barley get €15 extra tonne for taking 8 essential biodiversity measures and 3 optional ones. So just to show that, really a good tool of, working with your supply chain. Another example would be Cairn Homes, one of the largest house building companies in the country. They have really, they're acutely aware of the negative impact of which their developments would have on biodiversity. So they've planted a lot of native woodland in their developments and native flowers. But more recently, they've set the goal of biodiversity net gain on 40% of their commencements by 2024. So for everything that they take away in biodiversity, that they will replace 40% of it. So just, obviously they're thinking more strategically. They're not just planting the trees. They're thinking, what is our impact and how we can measure on it. I think a lot of people will be aware of SSE, the Galway wind farm down in Connemara, obviously an area of extreme biodiversity importance. They took extensive remedial and protection measures in the construction of this wind farm, but they also prepared an education program which they rolled out with schools in the local area. And this is just using their knowledge. And they've also rolled out this education program with the Business in the Community Ireland employment program. So these are migrants who've moved to Ireland, and we help them to settle in and get jobs. So obviously it's just and they did this during the pandemic and really impactful. So I think a really good example of companies using their knowledge for the greater good. So obviously I'm under no illusion that any of these companies will solve the biodiversity crisis, but just a flavour of what some companies can do just to get started. Definitely a lot more needs to be done. I think there's a lot of emphasis at this conference on the linkages between carbon and biodiversity. And in the conversations that we're having with our members, we are really, driving home this message. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but we're starting the conversation and making companies aware. The two crises are intrinsically linked. Climate change is threatening the balance of plants and animals at an alarming rate, but at the same time, biodiverse landscapes can play a key role in mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change. Forests are a massive source of carbon sequestration, but also wetlands act as a form of flood protection. And it's not just me who's saying it. In the latest IPCC report, with the exception of solar and wind energy, the most effective strategies for mitigating CO2 emissions are natural solutions, ecosystem protection, and restoration. The report found that between 11 and 14 billion metric tons of greenhouses per year could be mitigated through nature-based solutions. However, I would not encourage a company to base their climate strategy solely on nature-based solutions. Let's say, for example, the Science Based Targets Initiative, if you want to go for a to get your carbon target approved by them, you must decarbonize 90 to 95% of your operations in all scopes, and you can only offset or remove 5 to 10%. So it should be it should complement. You shouldn't base your strategy on offsetting, and that's in Business in the Community Ireland. In the conversations we have with our member companies, we really try to hammer that home. Also, as companies look in their Scope 3 emissions, that they should consider, if they're engaging their suppliers on carbon, that they should engage them on biodiversity too. It's a great opportunity. However, one thing I'd like to bring home, and listen to a podcast from Margaret O'Gorman from the Habitat Council, to a certain extent we can engineer the climate crisis, a bit controversial, but when a species is gone, it's gone. So that just really shows you that there are linkages, but there are a lot of differences. So my last slide, because I know we're conscious of time, as well as working with companies in Ireland, we really look at kind of the international focus. We are the partner organisation in Ireland for the World Business Council Sustainable Development. They've set out very strong membership criteria. So if you want to be a member, you have to undertake biodiversity actions. We're also the partner organisation for Business for Nature, which is the umbrella organisation. They're really beating the drum for biodiversity at the COP15 in Kunming for biological diversity. And they're really using the business voice to demonstrate and amplify a credible call on nature and calling for governments to adopt policies to reverse nature loss in this decade. And I often would have a lot of conversations with, other partner organizations in Spain, Brazil, Czech Republic, and I try to bring that home to the messages which we work with our company. Yeah, and thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the session.
That's great. Excuse me. Thank you, Cillian. That was a very informative presentation on the work of business in the community. Now, the next part, the next few speakers are representing our business community and really just showcasing the work that's being done currently in real time. And I'd like to welcome to the stage Maighread Cremin from Musgraves SuperValue to talk to us about the work that SuperValue is doing in relation to their community engagement. Thanks, Maighread.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm delighted to be here today to speak at the National Biodiversity the National Biodiversity Conference. And I suppose in SuperValue, look, we're very, very supportive of the work that's currently been undertaken to respond to this biodiversity emergency and to prepare for the new National Biodiversity Action Plan. When it comes to SuperValue and our network of retailers, we're very, very committed to building vibrant, sustainable communities, and we're absolutely determined to play our part in protecting Ireland's biodiversity. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing in the space of sustainability and biodiversity in particular. Our sustainability work in SuperValue focuses on three main areas: community, the environment, and being a better business. And I'm going to talk to you about the community side of our sustainability strategy, but just quickly wanted to share some of our wider sustainability activity. So we're very, very aware of the impact that we have on the environment. And it's for this reason that we have committed to reducing our net carbon emissions to reach net zero by 2040. We've come some way in this journey and have reduced our carbon emissions by 20% since 2014. In fact, all of our distribution centres currently run on green electricity, as do about 60% of our store network. And we have over 11,000 solar panels fitted across 30 of our stores. We are also very committed in investing significantly over the next 3 years to bring down the carbon footprint of our stores. And we're doing this through installing more solar panels, electronic labels in store, LED lighting and refrigeration. On the environment, we've committed that 100% of our own brand packaging will be recyclable, reusable or compostable by 2025, which is just 2 years away. And I'm happy to say currently 91% of our own brand packaging is currently recyclable, reusable or compostable. We also look, as I mentioned, on being a better business, and we're signatories to the UN Global Compact principles and are committed to sourcing sustainably and ethically. We're the greatest supporter of local and Irish, with 75% of the goods we source, or the goods we sell, being sourced in Ireland. And we support over 1,800 Irish suppliers. But these are just some of the steps that we're taking in our overall sustainability strategy for SuperValue. But the final and most exciting pillar, which I'm working on directly, is our strategy about creating vibrant communities. And this is where SuperValue is showing real leadership. Our view is that stopping climate change will start in our communities. And as we look to the future, we recognise the effort that's required by us, our retailers, and our communities to make this impact. We will continue to do what we can to invest and support in this so we can make positive impacts through our stores across Ireland. But nowhere is the power of community impact on our environment and biodiversity more evident than in SuperValue Tidy Towns. We've had the privilege of sponsoring SuperValue Tidy Towns for over 30 years. And in collaboration with the Department of the Community and Rural Development and the Tidy Towns unit, we've seen firsthand the impact community action is having on environment and biodiversity in our villages and our towns. I'm always impressed and inspired by the thousands of volunteers across the 834 Tidy Towns committees across the country. Their work is powerful, it's very meaningful, and it is making a difference. They are doing so much more than just painting and picking up litter. They're planting native trees, They're pollinator-friendly flowers, they're developing green areas, rewilding spaces and nurturing biodiversity in their communities. These committees are working at grassroots level in our communities. They're engaging with local businesses in their areas and mobilising whole communities behind sustainability and biodiversity initiatives. I suppose we're very, very proud to support Super Valley Tidy Towns nationally, but also committees locally through our stores. Our stores and our retailers give their own time. They often chair committees. They give financial support. They provide high-vis vests and litter pickers, teas, coffees, meeting rooms, plants and seeds. They're really, really proud to do what they can to support the great work of the Tidy Towns committees in their local communities. One of the key challenges facing Tidy Towns committees is that they struggle, however, to engage the youth and attract young people into the committees. Yet we know from all of us and what we see is how passionate young people are about sustainability and biodiversity. Over the last number of years, we've been working with the department and we saw an opportunity to tap into that youthful passion and to put it to good use by introducing and connecting them with their local Tidy Towns groups. Our research has told us that if we engage young people in primary schools, in particular, we can empower them to take informed conservation action, habits that will stay with them for life, such having a lasting impact for generations. So SuperValue, through our Save the Bees campaign, is on a mission to nurture the environment that will eradicate the threat to bees and bring communities together to create an awareness and take action. So we've worked with Dr. Ian Fitzpatrick in the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and we created a pollinator pack which we sent out this March to 2,241 primary schools. We wanted to raise the awareness of the importance of bees and show schools and students simple steps that they could take. The pack, which we made available in both English and Oscoilge, included bookmarks, classroom posters, guidebooks, and the schools and the kids really loved it and really, really engaged with it. We also gave packs of pollinator-friendly seeds, not wildflowers, and a garden sign to every school so they could create 2,241 bee-friendly gardens across Ireland. But you might say, why is this important and why is it important to SuperValue? Well, when we consider that 1 in every 3 mouthfuls of our food depend on pollinators, that almost 90% of wild plants and 75% of leading global crops depend on animal pollination, it's essential that we inform our young people and empower them to not only act on biodiversity, but also on future food security. All the while bringing teachers, parents, family members on the same journey and thereby having a community-wide impact. One bee, and I know it's not all about the honeybee, but one honeybee may only produce a teaspoon of honey in her lifetime. But together, a hive of bees will fly over 55,000 miles to make 1 pound of honey. That hive of bees can create 100 pounds of honey in a year, but all the while they're doing the equally important job of pollinating fruit and vegetables as they go. Like us, the bees are more impactful and stronger when they work together, and we recognise collective effort in SuperValue. That's why we're committed to doing what we can on climate action, not only through our work in the community initiatives, but as a business. It goes without saying that our Save the Bees campaign would not have been possible without the vital support of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan and the work of Professor Jane Stout and Dr. Una Fitzpatrick, and of course the National Biodiversity Data Centre. The work of the National Biodiversity Data Centre and other research centres is playing a key role in Ireland's response to climate change and the changing face of biodiversity, and we look forward to continued collaboration with them in the future. An additional insight that we have found is that there's a say-do gap with consumers. Often people find sustainability a confusing space and they need help to make the sustainable choice the easy choice. So we recently launched a new groundbreaking SuperValue store in Knockline in Dublin. And as part of this concept store, we wanted to create a sustainability journey for shoppers. And to make sustainable choice, this is the obvious and easy to shop. We made a feature of plant-based ranges, organics, local and Irish options, dairy-free, eco and refill ranges. We also highlighted our compostable shopping bags, LED lights, green energy and energy-efficient fridges. And when you add this to the work that the team does locally in the store with the local community and the likes of Ballyboden GAA and Ballyboden Tidy Towns, it becomes a new, more sustainable shopping experience. And the feedback that we've received so far has been amazing. This is what the future SuperValue looks like. a store deeply embedded in the community that supports local and Irish food suppliers, and one where the sustainable choice is easier to shop. And all the while, in the background, we are reducing our impact on the environment. I'm now just going to play a short video which hopefully will bring all of this to life for you, and I hope you enjoy it. And thank you for your time this morning.
Clonmel is known as the Vale of Honey, so we want to live up to that. I think that people are really surprised when they realise how many sustainability projects that the Tidy Towns are involved in. Probably one of our most famous landmarks now, which is our poppy sculpture on the way into Clonmel, we decided to turn that roundabout into a wildflower roundabout. It's super important to get kids involved in the Tidy Towns, and it has to start at a young age. Clonmel is known for cider, therefore it was a natural fit to us to want to plant an orchard. The benefits of the orchard would be that the area surrounding it becomes really biodiverse. We have a really good relationship with Stuart in our local Super Value. They're behind us 100% with every project that we do.
It's a great local community here in Clonmel, and everyone does their bit, and they're very conscientious about caring for the local environment here, and they're always very willing to get involved to make a difference in the town. It's so much more than just about picking up litter. It can make a real long-term difference. You know, obviously the bee population is something that, you know, we're very concerned about here, and I think it's just it's reinvigorated that opportunity to make a difference.
We're going to work towards making people more conscious of their local environment.
You need the B team. Go!
That's fantastic work there being done by Super Value, and very inspiring. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, which is Jean Kennedy, representing Devenish. She's the head of global innovation there. So welcome, Jean.
Thanks very much, Lucy, and hello to you all. My name is Jean Kennedy. I work in Devenish, and I'm the director of the Global Innovation Centre there. And I'll start by just showing you a quick video to introduce the company, and then I'll get into more detail about our work on biodiversity.
This is Devenish. Born over 70 years ago, we have invented, innovated, and pioneered our way forward to become the dynamic company we are today and the international leaders of tomorrow. Our story begins with nutrients at our core and a sustainability-first passion for humanity. We use our world-class research and scientific expertise to create and develop the most effective utilization of nutrients in the global food production sector. We optimize animal health and enhance and advance human life and well-being. We are a trusted partner, committed to long-term relationships and proactively improving producer margins. A collaborator, providing solutions to the complex challenges our industry sees ahead. And an innovator, focused on responsible agriculture and safeguarding the natural resources the world needs to nourish more people from less. We are one company with one voice across many countries, languages, and cultures. And one guiding principle that unites us all. At Devenish, we are making your world a better place.
So, as you'll have seen in the video there, we're in the business of nutrient optimization. And of course, that has very significant knock-on effects in terms of sustainability and biodiversity, thinking about nitrogen, carbon, etc. And we do this, it's a one system approach, so from soil to society. And I think that's what makes us different within, I suppose, our own field, so to speak. In 2013, we bought the Devenish lands at Douth. It's a 600-acre farm in the Brunabanya UNESCO World Heritage Site. You'll see there that the Innovation Centre is on the top right-hand corner, and our labs are hidden behind some of the unusual structures in the bottom picture. But I have to say, a real pleasure to go there to work. I have to pinch myself at times. And the farm is surrounded on 3 sides by the River Boyne. That means we've got 3 large floodplains and a large reed bed. What we do there, so ecology, carbon neutral farming, slurry additives to reduce emissions, soil carbon measurement. In fact, we're the first farm to measure the overground and above ground carbon. Using LiDAR technology and other things. Soil improvement, carbon sequestration, biodiversity regeneration, woodland management, agroforestry and diverse swards. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on only some of these. You'd be glad to hear, I think. But worth telling you that we are part of the global network of lighthouse farms. This is a designation given to us by Wageningen University, who are, again, this year first in the world for agriculture. In terms of the ratings for academic institutes. And they gauge this by achievement of the UN Sustainability Goals. We're also part of the National Signpost Farm Network, coordinated by Teagasc. So in 2018, we did an ecology report to get the baseline of where we're at. So we found that we've got 14 different habitats. We've got 54 species of birds. I've organised them here by their habitat. 5 of these are on the red conservation list. 11 of them are on the orange conservation list. We have 11 species of butterflies. This is the location of our bat detectors, excluding the one in the house there, Douth Hall. We found these 8 different species and a possible 9th. And indeed, we've got 7 different types of bees. We've got the usual array of land mammals. I haven't got them all here. You could include a pine marten, a grey squirrel, etc. But I have this video because, of course, as you know, the otter is so elusive. I did want to show this one off. So I hope you got a glimpse of him there. And indeed, you'll see the picture of the red deer there, and I will come back to the red deer. So, working with University College Dublin, Professor Peter Brama in particular, and also Ruth Carden, who is a deer ecologist, we actually, when we bought the estate in 2013, we also inherited a large herd of wild red deer. We didn't know anything about their origins, their lineage, the size of the herd. We didn't know anything about them. So what we did is attach GPS collars to 10 of them. And for anybody in the room who's tried to attach a GPS collar to a wild deer, it's not easy. So you'll see them celebrating with a bottle of champagne when the job was done. But what we now know is the size of the herd. We know where they eat, where they breed, where they sleep, the population dynamics. That's so important to helping us to maintain that herd because we think it's majestic and beautiful and part of the heritage of the valley, actually. And we want to make sure that that herd is sustainable in harmony with the surrounding environment. The great partridges. So back in only 1990, there were 20 great partridges on the whole of the island. These are Ireland's native iconic game bird. And so what we did is working with the NARGC, that's the National Regional Council of Game Council, we worked with them to start a reintroduction programme. So 3 years ago, we brought in 27 juvenile birds, and we started our own breeding programme. So for the last 2 years, I'll go back a slide for a second. For the last 2 years, we've been actually releasing more than 100 birds. And releasing them is one thing, but actually making sure that they stay around is another. So again, here's another video that really just made our day. So they're very sociable and vocal birds. So what we did to make sure that, to enable this to happen, we kept back some cold birds on site all the time, so they knew where home was. So, and the reason, part of the reason that they actually do call this home is because of the next project I'm going to tell you about, and that's about our multi-species swards. So the reason that they were almost eradicated was because of, I suppose, modern farming practices and lack of food. So the next project I'm going to tell you about is, as I said, multi-species swards, which provide an abundance of food for the likes of these partridges and, of course, lots of other things. Okay, so Heartland is the name of the project. So in 2018, I submitted a proposal to the McCorry programme of the European Commission. We were successful in that. And what that programme essentially did was brought in 5 PhD students to work with us in conjunction with Wageningen University and University College Dublin. And I showed you the slide of One Health from Soil to Society, the soil, the sward, the animal, the human, the environment. Well, we have a PhD student working on all elements of that on their individual programmes and, of course, together. So one of the key interventions in this study was a grazing experiment on multi-species swards. There isn't a project like this anywhere because of the scale of it. So we have 4 different farmlets of 9 hectares each. One is in a monoculture perennial ryegrass. I mean, we say all the time, monocultures don't exist in nature. So this was, I suppose, this is our control, if you like. So our monoculture perennial ryegrass, our permanent pasture, the farm actually had been abandoned for decades before we got our hands on it. So soil conditions, pH, all of that was way off. So between 2013 and 2018, it is important that I tell you that we did a soil management, soil improvement programme, so that actually we were starting on an even keel for all of our interventions here. We also put in these plots at 2.25 hectares each and scattered around the farm to take account of topography and soil type and all of those things. But we also then had 9 hectares of the 6 multi-species swards, including herbs, legumes and grasses. Of course, the legume content means that we don't have to put on as much nitrogen. And the 12 species sward is, again, herbs, legumes and grasses. But the interesting thing here is that we used the recommended rates of nitrogen on the different sward types. So 170 on the monoculture ryegrass, 135 on the permanent pasture, and only 70 on the multi-species swards. So that's a 60% decrease, and it was co-grazed by cattle and sheep. So I want to tell you about the impact of these multi-species swards right across. So if you look at the soil depth and carbon, we've talked a lot about carbon today, but you'll see here that at 10, 20 and 30 centimetres, the profile changes. And the multi-species swards at 30 centimetres shows us the highest content of carbon. And that's really interesting in terms of carbon markets, carbon trading, the stability of it in our soils. And here you can see we've done experiments on the soil structure, but ultimately it's better structure, more resilient, better able to deal with droughts and floods, and we've done tests around all of that. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do want to tell you about the earthworms. We absolutely love earthworms. We found 300% more earthworms in the soil under the multi-species swards and 600% more deep burrowing earthworms. So really enthused about that. Now, this is about business in biodiversity, so I think these next few slides are really important under that particular heading, because we show these slides to farmers all the time, and of course they have to meet the bottom line as well, but these show that actually biodiversity is a profit centre and not a cost centre. So with the 60% less nitrogen, we got 40% more dry matter. And you'll see that particularly in this slide here in the drought conditions. So in the summer of 2020, we had drought conditions in the area that's boxed off there. So you can see that the multi-species swards really came into their own in those drought conditions. And you could see it visibly. The ryegrass and the permanent pasture, they were scorched in yellow. The multi-species swards paddocks were beautiful green lush paddocks. And that's essentially down to the architecture of their roots. They go down deeper into the soil and they can actually bring water, moisture up and share it around. So that explains the improved herbage yield at that stage. In terms of average daily weight gain of our animals, an improvement of about 20%. And this is really, really impactful for sheep farmers in particular. We found that the lambs on the multi-species swards were 5 kilos heavier at weaning, and they fattened 42 days earlier. That is actually really, you know, again, talking about economics, that's worth a lot. And it's also worth a lot from an environmental point of view, because looking only at the reduced days to finish and at the reduced nitrogen inputs, we can see a 36% reduction in emissions on the farms with the multi-species swards. So I haven't seen a figure like that anywhere else. And in terms of meat quality then, going back to the value piece, it is higher in fatty acids and in particular ALA. So we're still finishing up the analysis on that, but I think to the point that we may even be able to make a health claim in front of the pack. So just finishing up now, right on cue, I think. So in terms of conclusions, ultimately, if I can sum this up in one line, it's that actually biodiversity and sustainable farming practices can be a profit centre, not a cost centre. Thank you. The slide that I just skipped over there was an invite to anybody who'd like to come and visit.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Jean. That was great. Very inspiring work, and the evidence is clearly there for this approach to farming. So a fantastic presentation there from Jean. I'd like to invite Keith Scanlon, please, if he's in the room. I don't know if he is. Oh, you are there. Sorry, Keith. Keith is working on the Dodder River project, which is very closely connected with the community. So, Keith, when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm glad I joined this one. I was in the other conference and somebody said, I was in the other room and somebody said, oh, I think you're meant to be with the businesses and community rather than the farmers and community or the other community. It's great that community are so central, isn't it? Isn't it brilliant? Was anyone at the last session there where we talked about the Community Foundation Ireland and their help for volunteers in the community? It was great. Any volunteers here? Oh yeah, lots of volunteers. How did you manage to get here? How did you manage? Did you take a day off to write the slides and then another day off work to actually come here and network? I did anyway. I always think it's great. It would be great to get paid to look after my biodiversity and my environment. That would be really brilliant. As one of these volunteers, I can get paid for lots and lots of little trivial projects on everything, but I can't get paid for the really valuable stuff, which is the people's time. But that's okay, because they volunteer for free. It's brilliant. We're like farmers in Dublin without being paid. But somebody said, what works for biodiversity? Well, here's my answer anyway. Community volunteers work. They really do. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. But we've got a great volunteering tradition in Ireland, and we do that. Like way back from tidy towns and GAA back in the day to, FCA and local defence forces and lots of things, and even through taking care of all our neighbours through COVID and everything. You know, we seem to do that naturally without getting paid, whereas in other countries, when I talk to my colleagues in other countries, actually their government does that, you know? The government actually looks after the community in other countries. We're very lucky. Communities do, volunteers do. So here's one of the community. So I'm an engineer and a public servant. I'm a director of various different groups and so on. And none of that is relevant really. But I'm a dad and I'm a community neighbour and volunteer, and that's relevant. So here's Daughter Action, one of the groups that I help and volunteer with. Doing a litter pick on a Sunday morning in Tala, and we did the Whitestown Stream in Tala, if anyone knows it. It was fairly badly polluted over 20, we could see about 20 or maybe 30 years, layers and layers and layers of pollution just upstream of here. And then, of course, we couldn't get insurance to go in the water to clean it up. But we got around that in the end. So the guys in the jackets, the blue jackets and the red gloves and the waders, we actually managed to get in the stream and go upstream 200 or 300 metres and get all the stuff down. And these are the public volunteers. We had about 50 public volunteers from the area turned up to help the core group and to get it out somewhere where we could give it to South Dublin County Council. So thanks South Dublin County Council for doing the bit, picking it up in the trucks afterwards. This is Cara in there in the water. She's a dog walker, Cherryfield Dog Walkers, and she's a proud member of the local community, the local volunteers and the local Citizen Science Army. We do citizen science, but not to help the scientists, to help change things in the community. So we kind of do both ends of it. Anyway, wanted to introduce you to Cara. I don't know how to go on, but... yeah. So we do lots and lots of things, and people at the last session describe them. We do litter picking, we do biodiversity workshops, we visit all the schools, we plant forests, little stepping stone forests in all the schools. We encourage the kids to read all about the biodiversity, so the fiction stuff and the non-fiction stuff and reference books and all of that, and make up on the top some Gael skulls we worked with. They were showing us a project on Brodon Fassa, the salmon of knowledge, and they said, and what other fish are known for what in Ireland? We're going, okay, don't know. Everyone knows on Brodon Fassa, but then we did a bit more research. So there's on Brodon Fassa is on Brach Lyasuk. So the salmon is known for giving you knowledge and wisdom and all of that, and the trout is known for giving you healing and health and all of that stuff. So we're starting to research and find out a bit more through our native language. More back to that later. Then one of the students here did a project and put it into the Intel Mini Scientist, and won for the whole country on a little biodiversity project, counting the insects in two different rivers and comparing them and seeing why are there so many more insects in that, but why are there a lot more variation of insects in the other one, and why is there only stoneflies and mayflies in one of them and there's not in the other. And they did their own version. They chopped up all my official charts and they reassembled it and made something better. And anyway, won the Intel Mini Scientist. They're in UCD as part of the UCD science presentations over the weekend, if anyone wants to catch them. There's Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, but don't mind him. He's the warm-up. The little kids from the National School in Greystones with the insects are the main act. Loads of that stuff. And then somebody said, can you talk about communities getting vocal and demanding their representatives to do what's needed and not standing for any development that isn't sustainable and all of that? And I said, yeah, sure, of course I can. So in our little community in Delgany, in North Wicklow, we tried to do that over the last number of years. With lots of good examples. There's some prehistory in there. It's, of course, the Glen of the Downs in Delgany and the Tree Tread Stream are thousands and thousands of years old. So every story starts with the Ice Age and the glacier and all of that. Anyway, pretty quickly, we need to get more modern. So just at the end of the last century, we had the eco-warriors in the Glen of the Downs giving us a great example of don't accept official decisions if they don't make sense for the community, if they don't make sense for the biodiversity and the habitat. And they stuck it out for years, and they got the route of the road changed a little, and they protected the stream. The stream is still there. It was originally planned not to be there, to be under the road in a pipe. They saved the stream. They saved some of the trees. They didn't save some of the rest. Anyway, good example. So more recently, we've kind of regrouped. Some of those guys are still around and help us, actually, the Eco Warriors from '99. they're getting on, but they still do reunions. Anyway, the younger generation got together, about 2000, and put together volunteers. And then we were focusing on tidy towns, and we decided we need to change the name. So we did. We don't have a tidy towns, really, although we're in the tidy towns competition. But we don't care about the competition, really. We care about the taking care of the place. So we changed it to conscious communities. And in Irish, it was Balcha Slachtwara, tidy towns directly. And we changed that to Balcha Bio, living towns, like in Byrne Bio. And we have Delgany Bio and Killamonthon Bio, Wicklow Bio, all of that. So the national organisation are still considering, will they change the name? So if anyone is wondering, can we change the name? Absolutely, we can change the name. You only have to say, yeah, I agree with the guys in Delgany who 3 years ago proposed it should be conscious communities and Balcha Bio, not tidy towns. That does not disrespect all the volunteers. We've asked them all personally, does that disrespect the volunteers who've been working on it for 60 years? And some of our guys have actually been working on it since the start, 60 years ago. Lally de Butler, Eamon de Butler's wife, is one of our directors and committee members. Does not disrespect anyone. All of the volunteers have already been conscious communities and gone way beyond tidy towns. Tidy is only a tiny, tiny part of it. Most of it is untidy and wild. Anyway, we changed the name. So 2018, we had a bout of eco-anxiety or eco-depression, almost. We got Pádraig Fogarty to do a whittled away talk with us. That was a mistake. Oh, he depressed the hell out of all of us. Sorry, it wasn't a mistake. It was very deliberate. We said, from our business training, we know the stages of change, and you got to go through eco-anxiety. You got to go through that to go the whole full circle change. So we did, and we got it over pretty quickly and pretty deeply in one night in the Horse and Hounds in Delgany in a Tidy Towns meeting. And we said, shit, this is much worse this is apocalypse, right? This is like falling apart. We need to fix something. So we decided, how do we tell everyone it's an emergency? And we decided, how about we just tell everyone it's an emergency and ask them to join us? So we did. In a tiny room in the back of the pub, we proclaimed an emergency in 2018. And it took us a while before we got our municipal district to declare the emergency. Then we got Wicklow County Council to declare the emergency. Then we got 18 other councils to declare the emergency. And we got the Dáil to declare the emergency, and also the EU Parliament, and also Stormont to declare the emergency. So nobody knows this, and nobody will give us credit for this, and we don't want any credit, but we did it first in the back of a pub in Delgany in 2018, and everyone followed. Climate and biodiversity emergency. So that was our declaration, or to start with, we called it proclamation, because, we have a good Irish tradition of 1916 proclamations and 1803 Robert Emmet proclamation and whatever. Got changed a little. Declaration, that's fine too. Emergency declaration. And that's good. And we wrote a whole load of what the action needs to be, what the mobilisation and the action needs to be. We wrote that in the back of the pub as well, and I'm going to wrap up. We got some of it in a Climate Act. Here's what we're asking the Taoiseach to declare this morning. He didn't, but at least he has the emails. He knows what the community have done, and we're offering the opportunity to stand with his community, stand with his voters if he wants. It's up to him. We set targets for trees. We set a speed limit. Please, everyone, you can do that on the website. Pledge that you won't go past 80 kilometres an hour speed, except on the motorways. That's all right. Planning process. We have to put biodiversity into the planning process. They're talking about that in the other room. We may do that. Only greenways. That's a big one. We're destroying our green areas by putting greenways, which are blackways, through them. We've declared this isn't acceptable in our community. These things, we will boycott any unsustainable development, developers, anyone. We're given the opportunity to the politicians and the Taoiseach to join the community if he wants. It's up to him. And we want a Biodiversity Act, and we want to get to eco-resilience. There's one of our daughter kingfishers. Here's one of our daughter otters and trout. I won't say any more about Irish, but there's great stuff in Irish. Really, if you see our Irish nature through Irish, you see an awful lot more. There's 32 words for fields. There's at least 85 meanings for brock. There's a brock, a trout in the otter's mouth. This is a dobercoo, a water hound or a dodder hound, Savraculus, in the dappled light of a stream at twilight or whatever. So, bottom line here, volunteers work. Don't forget them. It's not all about scientists and NPWS and politicians, and don't forget farmers as well, another type of volunteer. I'm originally a farmer from Mayo, but I'm now an urban farmer now. Volunteers work, use the force. Here, thanks to all of our sponsors around the edges there as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much for that. I think it's really important to highlight the importance of community and business engaging with community, and indeed providing volunteers for some of these projects as well. So having that, highlighting that connection. The last few speakers, we're going to touch on the Seeds for Nature, which was a feature of the previous Biodiversity Conference back in 2019. There were some commitments made back in 2019, and we want to revisit some of those with some of those companies now, to show us how they've done in the last 3 years. Just 3 more very brief updates. We were going to have a panel discussion, but time is running away from us. So I'd first like to invite Mark McCorry up from Board Namona to tell us how he's done with their projects since the Seeds for Nature Charter.
So, thanks very much, and thanks, Lucy, for inviting me to talk. I'm an ecologist. I'm lucky I get paid for looking after biodiversity. I also volunteer too, but I am really lucky. I'm privileged now in terms of the job I have. In relation to Board Namona, everybody's aware of Board Namona. Traditionally, we harvested peat. We harvested peat to supply power stations to generate electricity. We also supply peat for fuel and for growing media. But that's all stopped, and that's all stopped since the last conference, which is, shows how quickly things can change. So what have we been doing? Well, since the last conference, one of the Seeds for Nature was that Board Namona committed to re-wetting or developing a wilderness of 20,000 hectares of cutaway peatlands and wetlands and woodlands by 2025. So 20,000, okay, that's a nice number. What does that mean? It's a big area. So since then, we have been, tipping away with re-wetting. Back in 2018, I was managing maybe 3 diggers to block drains to re-wet. Last year, I had over 100 machines working at re-wetting. So we talk about engaging workforces. We had to switch a lot of our workforce from producing peat and draining peatlands to actually blocking those drains and doing all these other activities like the berms that you see here to re-wet that peat. So there's over 200 people have switched completely. One of the ways I describe it is the ecology team in Board Namona have almost gone in and taken over the energy team. And now we have a new division in Board Namona called Land and Habitats. And the vision for Land and Habitats, or that division, is to really provide professional peatland services, manage our Board Namona land bank, and manage it for biodiversity, for climate action, and for other sustainable uses, as well as all the various different commercial activities as well. So another one of our Seeds for Nature was about raised bog restoration, and we can make the distinction between rehabilitation and restoration. Restoration is where the bog will go back to bog pretty quickly, within the next 10 years. This was a bog we re-wetted last year. For me, this is fantastic. You can see the water right on the surface of the bog. This bog was just drained. It was never used for peat extraction, so it has really good potential for restoration. Our commitment back in 2019 was to restore 1,000 hectares. This has been an ongoing process. We have a raised bog restoration program, Board Namona. We're over 3,000 hectares so far, and the target will be 4,000 hectares. So, in relation to those various commitments, we are going to do a lot better. Now, just to show you a few other pictures about what I do and peatland rehabilitation restoration. This is a site down in Tipperary. This was a site, it would have been in Derryville, it would have been harvesting peat in 2017. This peat would have been used in the briquette factory that closed down. And this is what it looks like just last week when I visited just to take a look to see how it was doing. So, like, this is fabulous. This is fantastic. I nearly cried. I did. I wet my plants. Apologies. But this has really moved on, and like the trajectory for this, like it's really positive. But this is still emitting carbon, okay? And I suppose this just speaks to the time that it will take to switch these sites from being sources of carbon to being sinks, okay? And we need to understand that. We need to understand the ecology and the science behind that as well. Biodiversity. We know these sites are great for biodiversity, and sure, here's just one species, the common crane. This was extinct in Ireland. It hasn't bred in Ireland for 300 years. And sure, didn't a pair come and land in one of our peatlands, one of our re-wetted peatlands a couple of years ago. We didn't even know it was there. Now, I would love to say that I re-wetted that area of peatland that the cranes came, but those birds are just respond to that area that was just re-wetting naturally. And like, I suppose the point here is, if we do the right things, nature and biodiversity can respond positively. The other side of that is, this is just one species, this is just one pair of cranes. And unfortunately, all the indices show that the metrics for biodiversity, they're declining. The metrics for climate action as well, or carbon emissions as well, they're increasing. So there's a whole lot of work to do. Unfortunately, if I re-wetted all the Borden peatlands, it's not going to solve all of those issues, for Ireland in relation to peatlands. It will help. It is part of the solution. And here's another indicator. So this is the pair of birds that arrived a couple of years ago. This is another bird, okay, and it's landed in one of our peatlands just this year. So it's a third bird, and unfortunately it's on its own. So I need to go and find it a mate. But we will need more birds to come, to help this population. This is a good indicator. It is like a positive sign. And for Borden as a business, obviously we're moving away from peat extraction. We're moving to developing more sustainable business, very much focused on renewable energy. And so the challenge for me now is, as an ecologist, I know there are trade-offs, and there are always going to be trade-offs between renewable energy and biodiversity. What about some of the bird species here? So, hands up. Just a quick short poll. Who here has advocated in their business not to do something? Okay, so I see a few hands, that's good. So the follow-up question is, were you successful? So I was successful, but a lot of time I haven't been successful. And so the point really is that, sometimes the best thing to do is not to do something. And that's a real challenge, particularly for the people that we work with. At Borden, it is a commercial business. It wants to be commercial. It wants to grow. And how do we do that and also manage our biodiversity and hit the targets in relation to renewable energy and climate action as well? That's the challenge. That's for the next conference. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. I'd like to invite Maeve O'Reilly from Gas Networks Ireland to give us their update.
Hello everybody, it's really nice to be here and to be given an update for Gas Networks Ireland since we signed the Seeds for Nature Charter in 2019. That's a picture of our grass roof on our Finglas offices in Dublin, and there's actually a biodiversity research project ongoing there to look at arthropods that are in the soil and above the soil in conjunction with Dublin City Council and UCD. So that's what I'm just going to go through very quickly. And I just wanted to show a few examples of the corporate social responsibility work that Gas Networks has been involved in the last couple of years. I suppose when we signed the Seeds for Nature Charter, there was already a very well-established corporate social responsibility programme in the company. So I suppose what the business focused on was dovetailing that with biodiversity themes and using biodiversity as a way of working with communities. So we ran a few webinars last year, for example. We did drawing with Don Conroy, which was really successful. And we have been working with Leave No Trace Ireland last year. We're continuing to work with them this year on rehabilitating natural amenity areas that are in a poorer state. And we get the community involved and work with them, support them to deliver improvements there. And we've been supporting the biodiversity booklet that's been in the Examiner for the last number of years. It's a really great booklet if anybody can get their hands on it. So just to explain what Gas Networks does. So we operate and maintain the gas network in Ireland, and these are where all the assets are. So they exist in Scotland as well, and the north of Ireland and the Republic. There is about 700 people working in Gas Networks, and the gas network is one of the most safest and it's one of the most modern networks in the world. So the asset is worth about €2.7 billion. It's owned by the people of Ireland, and we are committed to delivering our services in a sustainable manner and to decarbonising the network. So biodiversity is led out by our sustainability team, and we're based in the asset strategy and regulation function of Gas Networks Ireland. And this ensures that we are, sustainability is at the centre of the business strategy for Gas Networks Ireland. And our approach to sustainability focuses on three areas, so environmental, social and economic impacts. And these are aligned with the UN sustainability goals. So I suppose Gas Networks is approved under 6 ISOs, including environmental and social responsibility. We won another award this year for sustainability at the Green Awards, and we've been reporting on the Carbon Disclosure Platform since 2019. So the Seeds for Nature Charter, these are the commitments that were made by the company in 2019. And it was signed by the Managing Director, Dennis O'Sullivan, and that was very important for the business in terms of getting buy-in from high up. So the first commitment was to manage all infrastructure and asset base and office locations on the island of Ireland and in Scotland in line with best practice by 2025. The second one was, as part of our renewable gas strategy, to support the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan in feedstock crops for the production of biogas, which was just spoken about in the Devenish presentation there. And then also to strive for net positive impact on biodiversity on all of our works, where we operate in different communities and to support different communities and enhance biodiversity together with them. So we set a target of 2025 for these goals. It's a very challenging target for the type of business that Gas Networks Ireland is. We're very conscious that the clock is ticking there. And I just have an image there of the mitigation hierarchy for biodiversity, because that really kind of is a framework for these commitments that have been made. I just want to mention also that signing this pledge was a real driver for kickstarting a biodiversity strategy in Gas Networks Ireland. And it was presented to the board in 2021 and they approved it. And that then led to a biodiversity action plan being developed. So just here's an overview of the Biodiversity Action Plan for Gas Networks Ireland. I'm not going to go through each of the actions, you can see them there, but I suppose there's 6 core actions, and essentially what they mean is changing how we work and bringing everybody along with us. So that means our staff, our contractors and our communities where we work. And again, the pledges were very important in putting shape and direction to this Biodiversity Action Plan and giving us, I suppose, time-bound targets. So just to give you, I suppose, a sense of the opportunities and the challenges that Gas Networks Ireland has in terms of delivering on these ambitious commitments, this is just a sample of the range of assets that are in the portfolio from Scotland and across Ireland. So there are about 200 AGIs, or above ground installations. This is where the gas pipelines come above the ground to have their pressure changed before they get back down into the distribution network. And you can see there, say on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, that's a very urban type of AGI. So it's really just covered in sort of stone chip concrete. There's no green space really, except for outside of the site boundary. You can see some trees. So that has pretty low potential. It's been very challenging in terms of trying to do anything with that in terms of biodiversity. What I need to mention also is that there are really strict safety requirements associated with all of these assets. If you think about it, this is where gas valves and pipelines are. And so first and foremost, safety has to be adhered to. So there's very strict protocols there, and these need to be considered before any changes are made at these sites. And that's to ensure everybody's safety, the operators and contractors and the communities where they are. So there's other sites we have which have more green space on them. So some of them have a pretty decent amount of space, and some of them might have, say, an SAC or a protected area nearby. And so that's important also to take into account, because that can raise the potential of adding biodiversity to those sites, where we can link up with that existing wildlife corridor and these protected areas that have a really high ecological value. We also have some decommissioned sites in the portfolio, so there's not a huge number of them. There's about 16. And so there's not active gas at those sites. So we have more opportunities, I suppose, to do other measures there. We're not as constrained by safety requirements. So, for example, we might be able to put a green roof or something on that building. We might be able to change the existing surface over to some green space. And security is also another key issue. So around these assets is a really high security fence, and it also has anti-burrow fencing that goes into the ground. So it's really to keep out any kind of legged animals or small mammals and humans. So I suppose taking that into account, bearing in mind the constraints in which we have to work to add biodiversity to these assets, the first thing we needed to do was to identify measures that would be realistic for us to implement and that would be trusted by everybody that works on these sites, so that they wouldn't feel compromised in any way, and that they would be, I suppose, realistic. So we needed to develop guidelines for the business, and these guidelines are targeted to our design teams, planning, construction, operations, and our contractors. So this is one way of trying to embed biodiversity thinking and positive nature positive thinking into the business. So key components of these guidelines, which we worked with Fingleton White and Green Pine Consultants and got them developed last year, are looking at, I suppose, the whole life cycle of our assets. So starting very early when we're maybe buying a parcel of land, and also thinking about other plans that might be associated with those sites. So we need to think about, look, is there another project lined up for this site next year? Because if we start planting trees in that corner of the site and then they end up having to get taken out, well, that's no good to anybody. So we need to think about short-term measures and long-term measures, and also on the sites themselves where the right measures in the right place, so the right types of trees and the right landscape setting, and for the conditions, the soil conditions, and the parts of the country, as we've sites all over the country. We looked at the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. We're partners in the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and they've been really supportive. So I'd really recommend, if anybody else is here who hasn't signed up to the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, they're a great resource. They're very generous with their time, despite the size of the team. So we asked them to review our guidelines when they were in draft, and they were very generous, and they did that, and they made comments on it. So that was great to get that sort of endorsement. So the other parts of the guidelines, I suppose, they look at obviously local and native provenance and certifying that. The kind of chemicals that are being used on the site, we need to look at herbicides and rodenticides and other alternatives to using them at the assets. Sustainable urban drainage systems, where we might be able to use bioswales or other kind of systems for surface water management, which will also provide a biodiversity benefit. And all of this is going hand in hand with risk assessment. So we've done an overall risk assessment. We've also done, say, a trial early this year on changing the way we manage the grassland with our contractors. And really, we've been working very closely with our contractors this whole time because they're instrumental to successful delivery of our biodiversity action plan. Another, I suppose, highlight, that I just wanted to go through because I don't have time to talk about it a huge amount, is our biodiversity measurement method, which we also focused on last year. So again, because we've made a commitment to achieve a biodiversity net gain or strive for that where possible, we need to be able to have a baseline on which to start. And we needed quantitative methods or quantitative metrics to be able to show our management and all of our colleagues and people who are involved in these sites what is the current value of the site in terms of biodiversity and what's the potential for it. And then over time, are we going up or down? So we needed to be able to measure our performance so that we had hard facts. It wasn't going to be, I suppose, qualitative assessments are very useful for certain things, but for the purposes of, I suppose, tracking our performance and our success, we needed numbers. So we enlisted Flynn Fernie environmental consultants, and we explained, I suppose, we needed a science-based approach. It needed to be proportionate to the ecological simplicity of our sites, because you can see there that they don't really have a whole lot going on. So it needed to be practical to implement so that we could roll it out across the country. Again, we were looking at the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and we looked to the UK's DEFRA guidance on biodiversity metrics. So I suppose the output of it is really, it's looking at habitat types, the number of habitats, the size of the area they cover, and crucially, I suppose, the condition that they're in. So there may be a hedgerow all around the site, but it might be a landii, and maybe we can replace that over time with more ecological high-value species. I suppose one of the beauties of this method, I suppose, as far as we're concerned, is we have numbers. I'm just going to show an image of the biodiversity scoring system that's in this method. So this is just one part of it. There's a report which goes into a bit more detail, but it's very useful to be able to have simple scoring system going from 0 to 5. This is something that we can communicate across our business, be it to the operators who are going to the site. We can use this traffic light system to say, look, it's really poor at the moment, it's red, but we can get it up to maybe yellow or blue. Also the tool that we have looks at what the potential is for that site and what kind of measures we might be able to apply. And together with, I suppose, our landscape guidelines, it means we have a fairly good toolkit now for making nature positive changes on these sites. So I suppose the way I see it, we'll hopefully use this scoring system to communicate across the business, and also to tell everybody, look, this is the score now, this is what we can do, and then we can identify who can do that and what everybody's role is in delivering it. And that means, like, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm amongst my colleagues in Gas Networks Ireland to get on board with this, but they don't know what to do. So this is really telling them what can be done and how, and each and every one of them then can know what their role is in delivering that. So comms and knowledge and training is really important, and that will continue to be important to deliver the action plan. This will also enable us to set site-specific targets and get those targets into budgets, which is critical for any business. We also want to complete the baseline at all of the sites around the country and have a register for them. We also want to do some more work on other aspects of natural capital. So as has been spoken about already in this session, the economic and social values, and specifically with volunteering, for example, there's lots of volunteering happening in our corporate social responsibility programme, but it's difficult for staff to get the support to go out and do that. So we need to apply a higher value on that. And again, if we can deliver biodiversity through some of those programmes, that's a win-win for everybody. And I suppose also we are signed up, or we've joined the Biodiversity for Business platform. So we're looking forward to really engaging with other businesses so we can all learn from each other and not waste any more time in terms of trying to figure out what we need to do and how. So I'm sure there's always there's lots of other people here today, and hopefully that will join that platform that can share their stories and solutions, and I'm really keen to talk to them because I'm also trying to figure out lots of things ourselves. So I suppose that the main message is it was really important to get buy-in from the top, but it's also really important to be able to tell everybody in the organisation what their role is and how they can get involved. Yep, that's it. Thanks very much.
That's great. I'm aware we've run over slightly, but we just have our final speech is from Hedda from Coillte Nature with their update. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name's Hedda. I'm the Outreach Manager for Coillte Nature. So, at the last Biodiversity Conference, it was committed by Coillte that we would invest in a specific area to do restoration work, which is Hazelwood. I know everyone's had trouble with this clicker today. So for anyone who doesn't know Hazelwood, it's a really beautiful woodland, very close to Sligo town, and you can see from the picture there, it's almost entirely surrounded by water. So you have the Garavogue River coming down one side of it, and then around the rest of it, it's surrounded by Lough Gill. And at the last conference, Coillte committed to spending about €500,000 on restoring this site. And it's really a very special site because to the north of it, there's an alluvial woodland which is of European importance, Annex 1 habitat, and the whole site is an SAC. You'll see this picture here in the middle. That's in the winter, so parts of the woodland, when you go there in the winter, you want to bring your welly boots or maybe even your waders because it gets really deep. And it naturally floods, and that's part of this type of habitat. However, you'll see in the other lower photo here, it was really badly infested with invasive species, so rhododendron and cherry laurel. And people all over the country know about rhododendron and how it's such a problem, and people are trying to deal with it. So the first step in this really was to do some planning. So we worked very closely with National Parks and Wildlife and Inland Fisheries to look at what would be the best way to manage this site and to tackle these issues. And a management plan was developed, and since then about 30 hectares of invasive species have been cleared in this area, so a huge amount of rhododendron, cherry laurel. You'll see the digger up there in the corner. To begin with, the contractors were cutting manually and shipping manually, and it was just such a giant undertaking that they just couldn't get through it like that. So they brought in some specialised machinery, and at one stage we had 2 of these working there last year. You can see my colleague Karen Woods here. She's looking at a whole load of rhododendron there. It's growing kind of in some areas 20, 30 foot high. And once you clear it, you can see that there's really been nothing growing there under the rhododendron. So it's really bad for biodiversity because none of the native species can grow. So once the rhododendron and the cherry laurel are cleared, we've been treating the stumps with herbicide because currently that's the prescribed practice, that we don't know of a better way of really stopping the regrowth. If you don't treat them, they're just going to grow back even stronger. So because it's a very sensitive area, in a lot of places we're using these eco plugs that you drill into the stumps and put the eco plugs in, and it's a slow release treatment. So we're going to continue working there, clearing the rhododendron this year. We've got about another 10 hectares to clear, some by hand and some by machinery, and to continue to manage this over the coming years, because we will need to manage the regrowth, and there'll be a plan in place for doing that. So in some areas then, once we've cleared the invasive species away, we want to be able to make sure that the native species will come back, and also looking at some areas of the woodland are kind of more of a mixed woodland. So we have the alluvial woodland in the northern part and alongside the river, and then in the more southern area there's a more mixed woodland. So there's a lot of beech growing there, hemlock, sycamore. In the centre of this site is the old Hazelwood estate. So, this area had been managed over hundreds of years, and different trees planted there, as you would get on different estate sites around the country. So one of the approaches then we're taking for restructuring the woodland and making sure that there's going to be more native species coming through is we're carrying out a continuous cover forestry thinning. So anybody who visits Hazelwood over the next while, you'll see that a lot of the trees have been marked. So most of them will be marked with an orange slash, like you see in the bottom there. but some of them, might see the top one that's actually marked with a kind of a like W sign, and that those trees with the W sign will be left as standing dead wood, which is good for biodiversity. The other trees with the slashes marked on them, they'll be removed, and the idea there is that we'll take out individual or little groups of trees, of non-native trees, and make more space for native trees to grow, and in areas where we take out groups of trees, we'll plant in some native species underneath. So it's really just allowing the sunlight to come through, to hit the floor, to allow new seedlings to grow, but also where there are already native trees growing in the canopy, to maybe take out some non-native trees around them and just give them a little bit more space. Also, there's an area kind of as you enter the woodland where there's a lot of ash trees and they're suffering ash dieback, so those ones will be removed and some new native trees will be planted in their place. And we've also established, working with contractors, 13 long-term biodiversity monitoring plots. So over the coming years, we'll be able to see over time how the biodiversity in the area is changing and what the impact of our works have been. And so also there were a few areas left in this woodland with commercial forestry there. So so one of those areas has already been felled. So it had been felled in 2018. And when we came in then to do the project, rather than having that replanted with Sitka spruce, that it has been replanted with native woodland. And that will be using a mix that really mimics the species mix that's already in the woodland and that we're trying to encourage. And there's a further nearly 5 hectare area of spruce which will be felled this year, and that will also be planted with native species. So really the overall aim here is to increase the amount of native species and to allow this woodland to thrive into the future. And this is building on really good work that has been done in the past by Coillte Forest, by the regional staff there that had actually a life project there 15 years ago. So part of the woodland had a lot of work done on it under a life project, clearing rhododendron by hand in really difficult conditions, people in waders and wellies doing that. And they really managed to stay on top of that over the coming years. And we could see then that, these sort of interventions were going to work there, and it's given us confidence to go ahead with this project. And just another part of this project that's really important is the education and engagement side of it. So Hazelwood is a really popular woodland. A lot of people from Sligo like to go there, go walking. People come to visit. It's in Yates country, so it's a very popular site. And there are people very attached to this woodland. So when we started works there, people were interested. They wanted to know what was happening. So we made sure to have signage there, letting people know about the processes that we're using, why we're doing it, that all of the works that we're doing here are for biodiversity, and to do activities as well. So there's a picture in the bottom there of my colleague Declan Little leading a nature walk there. And we've been collaborating with, say, the Hazelwood Heritage Society and Law Pro, and getting different community groups interested in the work and making videos and letting people know about the project. I realise it's nearly lunchtime and you're probably all waiting to get going. So that's just a really short snapshot. There's a huge amount of work been done by my colleagues and by contractors. So I'd really encourage you to come to Hazelwood, have a look, and you're all welcome. So thanks very much. Thank you.
Apologies again for running over, but just sincere thanks to all our speakers today. Really enlightened and really encouraged by what's happening in our business community. So again, thank you to all of you for bearing with us, and I wish you an enjoyable rest of the conference. Thanks.